Oh my goodness, deconverted man here. Oh, that was painful. My brain. Oh, my poor brain. Okay, so. So SJ Thompson is, as I am doing this live, it's live with this guy, Fazale Rana, who is a old Earth kind of creationist. And the topic of the hangout was, is science and Christianity in conflict? I've seen this play out before. It's usually is science and religion in conflict or whatever. And there's many ways you could address that question and answer it, but it wasn't addressed like hardly at all. I would say. I had a question of good old Frazley, which was finally asked by SJ, but not asked in the way that I presented it. Of course not, because that would have been intellectually honest. So we're not going to do that. We got to preserve our echo chamber, after all. This guy had the title of biochemist at one point. Looking at Fazale Rana, and I've got a couple links for you in the description here. It's pretty clear that he worked for Procter and what's it, Procter and Gamble, whatever it is, Procter and Gamble, whatever. Worked for them for a while, and according to what he said, he did he thinks one paper, one publication. So the answer is one, I guess. And then after he left them, or I'd be interested in if he got fired. But at any rate, after he left them, he started the RT Foundation, the Reasons to Believe, RTB, and it's just wrote for apologetic tripe for them. Nothing he says is scientific at all. His views have been completely rejected by the scientific community in full. The National Center for Science Education looked at his book and debunked the bleep out of it. So he's a failed scientist that's become a creationist. Not a big surprise. And my question was, what peer-reviewed papers does he have and how many citations? And I asked that again and again in chat. SJ skipped my question, and finally she got around to asking my question. But she said, well, how active are you in the publishing world or something like that? It's like, oh my God. It's so disingenuous and intellectually dishonest. But what more can we expect from an apologist? I mean, really, so here we have a failed scientist who doesn't deserve the title that he gained at some point as biochemist, in my view. He failed. He did not do anything of substance. And so for whatever reason, he's a Christian or whatever, whatever his lame, boring story of conversion was, which wasn't very interesting, that had nothing to do with anything. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that. He was a Muslim, or he grew up in that, and then, found Christianity. Whatever. I don't care. Where's the science to anything that you're saying? Well, you don't have it. Of course you don't have it, because you failed in your career choice, and this was a profitable idea. Let's, use my title as the scientist to make it seem like I'm legitimate and, publish apologetic books and papers on my website for that, and get money from, people that want to throw money at him. A fool and his money will soon be parted. So, hey, it works. It's a model that works. If you fail at science, become a creationist of some sort. So his group basically promotes intelligent design, and also promotes the idea that there was an actual Adam and Eve, or at least a mitochondria one, or something like that, and that we don't come from any apes at all. Of course not. and basically kind of has other questions about evolution, which means he doesn't understand it or wants to understand it. He has questions about abiogenesis, i.e., he doesn't understand it, doesn't want to understand it. What I also found interesting was the chat and how insane the moderators that SJ has picked are. Just don't know anything about logic or science or burden of proof or anything for that matter. Complete and utter bias, just insane. One of the people said, "Oh, you're not aware of the scientific thing lately that was this controversy that the peer review thing has been shown to be flawed." Yada. I'm like, you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Like, yeah, there was a thing that happened regarding certain aspects of publications in gender studies and things like that, and others have had problems shown, but that doesn't mean that the whole system is flawed, nor does it mean that this particular thing is flawed, and it really doesn't answer the question anyways, which is how many things has he had peer-reviewed and published, which the answer seems to be one. I couldn't find anything online to tell me if he has more than one, or anything for that matter. Now, one of the guys in there said, he was welcome to come and talk to me on my channel, but then I guess he stopped paying attention or whatever because he wasn't responding to me. So, oh well, whatever, I guess, But yeah, it seemed that we were on the same page, and so the moderators didn't like him. It's like, we don't have an explanation for why we value beauty. And I'm like, okay, even if that's true, which I don't think it is, but even if that's true, so what? What does that mean? I asked one of the guys that said, what does not having an answer for X mean? And he had absolutely no idea what X, he's like, what do you mean by X? I'm like, X is a variable. Like, you don't know that? Like that's not normal speech. Like, oh my God. How do I ask this question? What does it mean to not know the answer to something? You nitwit, And they kept going, ask nicely, say please. I was like, oh my God, guys, just answer the questions. And I said, this nitwit, Frazale, should debate Aaron Ra. And they're like, well, how many citations does Aaron Ra have? I'm like, I don't know if he has any, but he'd beat Rana easy, hands down. He'd wipe the floor with this nitwit. But Ra doesn't claim to have any title, whereas Rana is using his biochemist title as a appeal to authority to make it seem that it matters. What he's saying. So yeah, so Mingun in chat. Hey Mingun. So we don't have an explanation for emotional response to imagery. That's an argument? Yeah, apparently for this quote, not enough quotes in the universe, scientist Rana, who, oh, by the way, he used the watchmaker argument. I could not believe it. And he made an argument that well, it's not really a God of the gaps fallacy that we're doing here. See, we have these really complex structures of the cells that have these micro-mechanical things, the typical thing that we expect from ID proponents to say. And we're not saying that they're irreducibly complex. We're just saying that they're really complicated, and so they look designed. I'm like, oh my, really? You what? And because we have that, and we don't know where life came from, and we don't have answers for this and that. There's like this three-pronged attack for pointing towards intelligent design. Well, he didn't say intelligent design, but he said creation or something. I don't remember now. It was long and boring, and I couldn't deal with it anymore. I just wanted my damn question answered, and it didn't really even get asked. But basically every argument, and I put those in quotes as well, that he had were things you would expect from an apologist, but not a scientist. but that's okay because he's not really a scientist. He published one paper and that's it. And he worked at Procter and Gamble for a while, so whatever he did for them, who knows? I don't know. I wonder if he got fired, or maybe he just saw that he was going nowhere in that field and left. I mean, it but it's interesting. Hey, Reason Vision, boop. But yeah, so we don't have an explanation for X, and you guys and gals understand what X means, unlike the moderator in there, that other live hangout, which is still going on, by the way. So you can go see how long you can stand, and go read the chat. It's just hilarious. Just go read the chat. It's fun. I'm tempted to do a video just reading the chat and complaining about it, but I don't think that would be that interesting. Am I reviewing a debate? I wish it was a debate. No, I'm reviewing a hangout between Fazale and SJ Thomason that's happening right now as I'm talking. And the question that they're examining, that they didn't examine at all, was is science in conflict with Christianity? And it would have that might be an interesting talk to have, but they don't really address it because he's too busy absolutely lying about science and getting things so wrong that it's ridiculous. At one point, he said that language came out of nowhere and has no evolutionary explanation for it. That's an outright lie. Language did not just appear in our timeline. That's not a thing that happened at all. At some point, we don't, we can only go back so far with written language, and then before that, obviously, you'd have spoken language before that. Probably the click languages are some of the earliest languages that we had. And linguistics know this, and you can graph out our English from proto-languages that came before it. Latin, for example. Almost every, Latin, Arabic, and, all these things. There's a clear evolutionary progress to language. To say that there's none baffles me beyond. I'm like, wow, you definitely aren't a scientist of any stripe at all to be able to say that. It just baffles the mind. I was like, oh, I'm a biochemist and I'm going to talk about linguistics. Even if you were still a biochemist, that doesn't mean you know anything about linguistics, but I would expect you to understand something about it, but he don't. The chat replay is disabled. Oh. Well, it might take a little bit for that to get up there, Main Gun. Because sometimes it takes a while to process it. But yeah, if it doesn't go up at all, well, that's a shame. I should have recorded it. But I wouldn't be surprised if SJ didn't want it played back, because it shows how dishonest they are with these sort of critical questions that are given to them. So my thought is, you have a guy that's like, well, I was a biochemist. I published one paper. Woo. And now I'm an apologist. And here's some arguments for ID and the watchmaker. And we don't understand how beauty came about. So even if that's true, let's just say, okay, fine. We don't have an explanation for how we perceive beauty. Okay, and so we don't have an explanation for that. So what? That doesn't mean anything. What is your point? And this is what was happening in chat over and again, where people are saying, well, we don't have an explanation for this or that. And I'm like, okay, so what? That doesn't mean anything at all. It just means we don't know. But they bank on this as some sort of it's appeal to ignorance. Well, I don't know the answer, so the answer must be this answer that I've found. Um, but yeah, looking up Fazale Rana, I couldn't find the one paper he did, but everything that came up on him when I Googled him is related to apologetics, and I couldn't find his scientific anything other than he worked at Procter and Gamble. So if you find anything about this guy, I'll link it. I'll happily put it in the description because whatever he did deserves to be highlighted. Whatever little that he did should be there. I mean, that's something. Hey, I haven't written a darn thing that's been peer reviewed or published, but I don't make that claim. I'm an amateur logician at best. That's my only claim. I'd wipe the floor with him with the watchmaker argument, but I wouldn't be able to do the science stuff. That would be like Aaron Raw's territory or something. But I would say I would tentatively grant the idea of an intelligence that made all the stuff that we observe and be like, well, but you have to kind of admit then that the intelligence wasn't very good at its job. Like, you don't, like, if you're going to use the watchmaker analogy, sure, let's run with that. So, of course, there's problems with it, but okay. Wouldn't you want the watch to last as long as possible and to work all the time and not break down? Yeah. And if you gave the same success and failure rate of humans to watches, like globally, you'd have a company that produces decent watches that last for maybe 40 to 50, sometimes 80 years, depending on where you get the watch. You'd have a chance that the watch will be defective and that there's no way to return it or to replace it. You only get one watch from them as well. You can only buy a watch from them one time. So they would have a decent success rate, and I suppose they'd be in business, even though they would have a really terrible rate of unsuccess as well. But yeah, you would kind of go, well, why doesn't that company do better than this? And if there was another watch company where, they guaranteed their watches for, lifetime, or there's this Cutco does these cutleries, and they have a forever guarantee, which is like, as long as you have the receipt that proves that you bought it, like, it doesn't matter who it is that has that. They could turn in the knives and get a replacement or whatever, supposedly, as long as they pay shipping and handling. Now, whether or not they actually honor that forever until that company no longer exists, I don't know. It's not been tested as far as I know. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird guarantee to have because it's better than lifetime. It's forever. So your generations from now will be able to, get their knives in and replace them. So, I just, so Main Gun's sister is on a published scientific paper. So she contributed with the administration to the discovery. That's pretty cool. I mean, I wish like I could appear in any. I'd be like, oh man, I'm gonna be humble, Yeah, watches evolve, confirmed. But even if we stick to that idea, you would have to say that the company that made these watches is not a very good company. They don't have return policies. You can only get one watch. You don't know if it's going to be a good watch. The watch's quality depends on where you buy it, like what region you buy it in. Like, buy a watch in, let's say, in a third world, it's not going to be very good quality. It's just not. It's not going to last long. You have to constantly wind the watch, because I'm trying to, make the analogy to feeding. Oh, you also have to constantly clean the watch. You have to take it to the repair guy sometimes. It's not a very, it's not as good as they could have made it, So sure, intelligent, but not the best. So then if you have somebody claim that that's the best watch company around, I think that people would be like, no, it's not. Like, it's not perfect. Like, there's better watchmakers out there. Like, come on, you got to be kidding me. So even if we tentatively grant, which we shouldn't at all, the watchmaker argument, it falls apart to demonstrate an intelligence because that is also a all-knowing intelligence, an all-wise intelligence, or something of that nature. And of course, the analogy breaks down because a watchmaker does not possess the ability to also make the physics that the watch exists inside of. So it's so far removed from the thing that it's trying to be an analogous to that it breaks down upon critical examination, which is why it's not an accepted logical argument. There's many, many logical fallacies in it and premises that are just incoherent. And of course, the problem is if everything is designed, then how do you make any comparison at all? How do you make the analogy if everything is a watch? How would you ever tell the difference? So you couldn't, and there's a problem there. But it did basically boil down to don't understand some stuff about evolution. I believe this, I believe that, and therefore God. And his title of a biochemist is if it was at one point valid, I would say no longer applies because he doesn't do biochemistry anymore. He doesn't have a lab. He admitted that in the stream. So why would you put yourself out there in that way? And the only thing I can think is because you want to try to lend some authority to what you're saying. It's like, oh look, we've got a scientist that happens to be a Christian. Yeah, but the problem is you can't do science on Christianity. And this is even some of the people were saying, you're talking about something. I said, how would you hope to explain with science how somebody can come back from the dead, like dead? Like what would be the biology of that? Like you'd have to explain how that could work. And at that point, you couldn't because you'd be trapped. If you gave a naturalistic explanation, then Jesus isn't a miracle. And if it's not a miracle, then it's not of God. So you would have to say it's not scientific at that point. So your answer would have to be that certain parts of Christianity are in conflict with science because science can simply not address them. That would be the intellectually honest answer. But of course you're not going to hear that on SJ Thomason's video. Of course you're not. So it was frustrating not getting my question answered, but I really didn't expect it to be. It was interesting to see how the echo chamber, as we often call it, functions. And of course, I always try to turn this around on myself. Oh, well, I'll mention one more thing. And if you listen to the Hangout all the way through, you have more fortitude than I did. After my question was answered, sort of, that wasn't really even my question, I left. I was done. And then I started this. And then people came in. And then oh, no, it's an infinite loop. Okay. If you listen to it, there's a point where the Fazale guy makes the other guy that's in there, sorry. There's three people in there, and the one guy that's talking, Fazale can't hear him for some reason. But at any rate, he makes the largest straw man of atheists I think I've ever, well, I wouldn't say that I've ever heard, but I guess I could say it just because it sounds cool to say it, but that wouldn't be true. That atheists use the natural have to use the natural method. They cannot ever accept anything that wouldn't be natural. So they could never get to God, basically. I'm like, no. There is no atheist blank other than atheists don't believe in God. That's it. You can't. You've created a straw man simply by asserting that basically that atheists are naturalists. Not all atheists are naturalists or materialists, and there's a slight variation between a naturalist and materialist, I think. Although I think the distinction is moot. But of course, those they might disagree with me. But the scientific method is natural in the sense that that's all we know about. That's all we can really test and examine and poke at. If there's something other than that, then we would find it eventually using our methodologies and tools and techniques. Let's say there's a higher dimension. And of course, there's hypotheses that there's, I think, up to 12 dimensions and things like this. So let's say that we want to find one of those dimensions. You have to show that it. You have to build some machine or something that would show that was a thing. And so let's pretend that we made that, and we found this dimension with an infinite source of energy that defies all our understanding of logic and reason. But that's just how the dimension is. It's infinite energy. Now, is that God? Well, I don't know. It could be. For all we know, it is. And somebody could declare that it's God. And you say, well, that's interesting. I guess we found God. Well, but how do we know it's God? Well, maybe it's in the shape of the word God or something. I don't know. But even if that was the case, you'd still have unanswered questions that, well, why is it in English instead of some other language? Like, just to begin, why, it's like, oh, we finally found God, I guess, but it's this infinite energy in the shape of the word God in English. Like, if you can't ask it questions, then you couldn't get answers from it. And even if you could ask it questions and get answers, what questions are you going to ask to try to figure God out? Or but we're not even there yet. But it doesn't matter, because the Christian, or at least some Christians, because not all Christians are the same either, the view of God promoted is one that defies all scientific discovery in the first place. It's put into a category that cannot be found by natural methodology. It's asserted to exist. It's not shown to exist. And if you could show it to exist, it wouldn't be that God anymore. It would be a different God. So if you had proof of God in science, it wouldn't be that particular version of God. And so for the majority of Christians, I would say that you would have, if you found God in science, it wouldn't be their God. It would be a different God. And they wouldn't even recognize it as God. Many of them would reject it because you can't find God with science, according to some. Now, some think you could or might be able to. It just depends on who you're talking to. How does one distinguish the difference between the natural and supernatural? That's a good question. I don't know. The supernatural it depends on who you ask, but it's basically, well, whatever isn't natural is supernatural. Well, what does that mean? So, and then people were talking about beyond space and beyond time. But that's just not coherent to us, because if you don't have space or time, you have nowhere and no when to be. So at that point, you don't exist anymore. And it's like, no, but that's where it exists. And it's like, how would that work? Like, what's your proof of that there is a beyond space and time in the first place, or a no time and no space, or What if it's atemporal? Or, I mean, there's, all sorts of ways you could go down that rabbit hole. But the problem with supernatural, I think, I've done a video about this, is the identification of it in the first place. So in the video I did about it, I hold up this, magical glowy cube thingy, and I say it's supernatural. And then I ask how I would prove that it was, or how you would prove it was, or how any of us could ever hope to prove it. Because the idea is, well, if you eliminate all the natural possible answers, then it would have to be supernatural. But that's not true, because you could never eliminate all the natural possible answers. You just don't know enough. And even if we did, let's just say we understood everything that there was to understand, and we go, okay, we've eliminated all the things. So the answer is, we still don't know, because it doesn't make the answer the thing that you haven't demonstrated that is even an answer in the first place. So the door opens, you don't know how the door opens. Is it a ghost? Well, it could be, I guess, if ghosts can open doors, but where's the proof of the ghost? So, and then to put the ghost in a category that can't be tested or observed makes it, unfalsifiable and untestable. I also enjoyed, during the conversation, there was Fazale Rana talked about God is hidden and reveals itself through nature, like, I guess, the complexity of ourselves or whatever, which we wouldn't find out until the modern era. So, but God's hidden, yet reveals itself. So wait a minute, which is it? It's hidden or it reveals itself? Like, you can't do both, can you? And then, of course, and revealed himself in the past, and Jesus, and was willing to die, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it would have been more impressive if Jesus had stuck around. But the problem is that there's so many questions about that. Okay, so Jesus is God. Let's just say that for tentative argument. Okay, great. What about the rest of the world that doesn't know anything about Jesus during his preaching? Because there's a whole other world out there that doesn't know anything about this right now. Nobody in Asia knows anything about Jesus. Nobody in North America or Australia or Canada. Nobody anywhere except for this small, teeny, tiny dot knows that God is revealing itself to humanity. Yeah, sure. It would have been far more impressive if it had happened everywhere at the same time. Like, if in every culture a Jesus had shown up, and the message was the same in every single culture. And how about this? Just stick around and be immortal and let yourself be tested and ask questions. How about that? Then I would know you were real, and there'd be no question about it. Yeah, I could just go to the person and be like, hey, the God, and say, hey, what's this about? And, they'd have an answer. But that's not how it works, because that's not what the theology is. And of course, if you made that claim, your theology wouldn't last very long, because you can make pretty extraordinary claims in religion and get away with it. But there's some line that is drawn, and I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to try to do like an analysis of where that line is. But there's some sort of line that people won't cross. Like, there's only so much people will be willing to accept and grant. Like, at some point, there's a line that's like, oh, that's just too much. Like, but if you have a very cult-like mentality, there's two ways that a cult ends. Either the leader dies and it becomes a religion, or everyone in the cult suicides. Because when you start to make claims that you can't possibly hope to prove, the only thing you can do is get everybody to kill themselves, because they're going to demand that you produce the thing that you said you would at some point. They're going to demand the proof. So the meme can only exist, there's some cutoff, and I don't know where that is, but it'd be interesting to figure that out. Anyways, hey, bad-tempered badger, what's going on? No, you have to go back in time and find out. I'm sorry. What's natural? Anything that's tangible. Yeah, I guess that would be what's natural. Okay, so concepts that like math are not tangible. Is math supernatural? Well, this gets into the thing, and they made the straw man that atheists don't believe in the mind at some point in that hangout. I mean, and this guy, you listen to Rana talk, and you just wonder at what point he's going to say anything scientific. And spoilers, he doesn't. He just basically lies and about science. He's a charlatan, pure and simple. He's a failed scientist that became a creationist. Anyways, but you can listen to the hangout. I've got the link in the description. Not now, obviously. You got to listen to me first, and then you can do. Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, I'll feel bad. So, there's a couple ways to look at the math thing, because I'm getting off track. Okay, so there's concepts of the mind that exist only in our mind, only in our brains. They don't, and by mind I mean brain. It's it's same thing, essentially. You could argue maybe, but so concepts of the mind like math, letters, numbers, musical notes, they would not exist without us to label them, but the things that they represent would still exist. So even if there was no minds, it would be true that 1 + 1 is 2. It's just there would be no one to say the word 1 plus or 2. So the reality of the universe would stay the same, because it did just fine without any humans or animals or anything around before the Earth formed. So for the, let's see, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, for the first 9 billion years or so, the universe did just fine without the Earth. And, then the Earth did however long it went without life. It did just fine. So the laws of the way things work would still be true, but there's no one there to label them. So if there was a musical sound, there'd be no one there to classify what note it was, but it would still be a sound. So if the tree falls in the woods and nobody's around, yes, it makes a sound, because that's how it works. You don't have to be there to hear it. It still makes a sound. And some do have the idea that math or numbers or letters or words exist as some sort of duality, that you have the physical and then you have the metaphysical, and that letters or numbers are real in some metaphysical sense. I don't hold that view, by the way. I view them as concepts of the mind. They exist in our brain. We can tell each other about them. We can explain them to each other. They're very useful, but that's the only place they truly exist. And you can't find one in nature. Like, you could find a rock that was shaped like the number 1, or shaped like ich in Japanese, or uno in Spanish. You could find rocks shaped in that way, but that's or something shaped in that way, but it wouldn't be, you can't find the one. It's not there to be found, unless we find it, and then I don't know what the hell that would look like, but I guess it would be made up of 1 molecules or something. I don't know, but I'll get to that question. So these objects of the mind still require the mind. So they're ultimately still natural in nature. In fact, the reason that they exist is because there is an existence. There is a nature to observe, to then label in the first place. So if there wasn't a place to be, then well, there would be nothing to be, and nobody would have anything to say because there wouldn't be anyone. There'd also be no rules, which is a concept that really messes with my logical mind. But that sometimes comes up when you get into like, well, but nothing can't make anything. How do you know that? If you had nothing, you have no rules. So it can do whatever it wants because there's no rule. There's no rule that says that something can't come from nothing. That's a rule. If you have a rule, then you have something. So if you have a true nothing, there's literally no logic and no rules. Because the moment you put a rule there, then you have logic, and then you don't have a true nothing. So, but I don't think that a true nothing is even a thing either. But who knows? Is there something that's not tangible or testable that nevertheless can be demonstrated to exist? Not that I know of, but I live in hope. That's just what I've been looking for on my channel from pretty much day one. Is this question that I do not know, honestly, I don't know the answer to. Logic has a limit. And like I said, I'm an amateur logician at best. Although maybe you might want to credit me being more than amateur. I don't know. If somebody pays me to be a logician, I guess I'd be a professional at that point. But there's a limit to logic where you have the valid and sound argument, but you still have to see if it's true. So either the light's on or it's not, therefore it's not on. I mean, yeah, okay, great, that works, but how about I just look and see if the dang light's on? Forget about the argument. Just to see if the dang light is on or off in the first place. So I still have to verify with reality that the argument is valid and sound. So the question is, could there be an argument that is valid and sound, and yet somehow at some point you didn't have to verify something in reality to make it valid and sound? I don't know. The opposite, there's a fallacy called the fallacy. And this is a fallacy that occurs if and only if you say, your conclusion must be false because your argument sucked. Or your argument had logical fallacies, therefore your conclusion is wrong. Well, their conclusion might be true regardless of how crappy their argument is or how many fallacies are in it, which is why I say you have to be skeptical of the conclusion, which is different than saying that the conclusion is false. So either my light is on or off, lobsters exist, therefore my light is off. Well, that doesn't make any sense in logic, but it's true that my light is off, although I can't show you that because I don't have a webcam. Somebody buy me a webcam. Self-promotion. I have a PayPal. You can send me money. But the conclusion within the system of logic is not one you can trust. So you have to be skeptical of it. But the fallacy says you can't say it's not true. So I wonder if there's an opposite to the fallacy where you have a valid and sound argument, but somehow your conclusion is wrong. I don't think that that's possible, because if it was, then logic breaks apart and no longer works. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't somehow do it. So maybe somebody somewhere, someone will figure out a way to break logic, and then we'll have to devise a new system of logic. But for now, I've never seen it happen. But that doesn't mean that arguments can then therefore be seen as evidence either. Because if that was the case, I can construct a reasonably sound argument that would show that I should have $1 million, and then I would what? Obviously, I have $1 million because I have an argument. So that doesn't really work either. So there's a limit with logic. So I don't know if that answered Main Gun's question or not. I guess the answer is I don't know. I haven't seen that happen, but who knows? Maybe today we can't measure or test it, but tomorrow we will be able to. And that's kind of where the whole, that if you have a thing and you don't know the answer, to then insert an answer, even if that answer fits, doesn't make that answer the answer. So I had a little cartoon. Let's see if I can figure out how I can post that. Maybe I'll just put it on Twitter or something and talk about that as my analogy here. Oh boy, this is great entertainment. Listen to Deconverted Man as he looks for the picture that he drew. Where the bleep did I put it? Did I put it there? Please tell me I put it there. There it is. Got it. Yeah, I found it. Oh yeah, tweet that out. All right. Okay, so it's been tweeted. Now I share that. Let's see, how do I do that? Oh, it doesn't do the copy anymore. I have to do it like this. I hate that. Screw you, you new thing in Twitter. Okay, so, hey, Snuffy. Must escape. Let's try to have a chat sometime. Yeah, bad temper. Wait, what? Math is the purest form of science. Yeah, well, it's often said that, math is like one of the things that we can be certain about. And yeah, I agree, I guess. I mean, zero's kind of weird, but you said, Gravy, Flaming here, you said that tree makes a sound was meant with contention. Well, who contended that? They're wrong. I mean, yeah, trees make sound if they fall down. Unless they're falling on, like, something really soft that absorbs the sound. Could happen. Bye, Badger. Okay, so this Twitter, I don't know if you guys, gals, robots, etc., can see this cartoon I made, or if it's too big and you have to, like, download it and then make it bigger. I don't know. Anyways, so you have two people and you have a situation where you have a tree and you have fire and you have marks in the ground. Well, the answer is obvious, the dragon. That's what caused all that to happen, because the dragon totally explains all of it. Dragon made the claw marks, and dragons can breathe fire, and a dragon's powerful enough to rip the tree down. Well, just because the answer fits the scenario doesn't mean that that's the right answer. It's possible there's a triangle that violates Pagathon's theorem, but until we find it, the inference stands, because so far it works every single time. Yeah, basically that's where I'm going with the system of logic in and of itself. But you have to admit there is a limit of logic in that, first, of course, arguments aren't evidence. Secondly, that you have to verify with reality that to avoid logical fallacies. I've been talking to Flamey on and off about different arguments that he's trying to come up with. I'm very impressed that he's really trying to understand logic, and he's doing great on that. Encourage him. Keep it up. Fantastic. He's like, man, there's a lot of fallacies to keep track of. Yeah, at least 1,000 some odd. I mean, yeah, there's a lot. But making something into a hypothetical syllogism is one way to avoid a lot of fallacies. So instead of saying X is true, I say if X is true, then whatever. So although a hypothetical syllogism is seen as weaker than a modus ponens or modus teleos, it's still, if it's the best you can do, then it's the best you can do. And so I would categorize, say, arguments for God or whatever into hypothetical syllogisms to avoid the problems that they tend to incur. So even the ID thing, which I think is complete non-science, it's not an argument of science, an argument of philosophy. I think that this misunderstands science. But if you wanted to make that argument, you would have to accept that your intelligence isn't the sort of intelligence that could have made it better than it did. for whatever reason. You also have to put it into the hypothetical. That if it is, then this, then this, then this. And it'd be a lot of ifs. And plus, you'd have to try to avoid the problem that, science kind of says no to the whole thing. But you can avoid a lot of fallacies by making your argument a hypothetical one. So nothing does not exist by definition. Right. Well, we've never observed a nothing, whatever that is or isn't. And of course, if you did observe it, how would you know? I guess, like, oh, here's some nothing. See, there you go. Like, and does naming it nothing make it something? Like, well, it has a name, so it's not really nothing because we call it nothing. So it's not really the true nothing wouldn't even be called nothing. I don't know. But it might just be that when you have an absence of all the things, that even then there's still stuff that goes on, and that would be the Lorentz Krauss version of nothing, which I like to call LN or nothing 2 or N2 or something, because it's confusing to call it nothing. But that might be this true state of what having a lack of stuff is this quantum uncertainty soup that does weird stuff. So in that state, that a universe is inevitable. And it might be that we're headed towards that state again as the universe expands outward, or the cosmos, I should say. I'm going to try to make that distinction more clear, because I keep hearing people say universe, and it's like, well, the universe is one thing, and then the cosmos is the thing that we're talking about with the Big Bang. So, like, the universe is like everything else that the cosmos is expanding into. And I don't know if it's helpful to view it that way or not, but they also said the beginning of the universe. I'm like, no, I can't. The scientists said this. I'm like, there's not a beginning. There's no time. There's no beginning. If there is, we don't even. There's the T point. That's okay. That's when time starts. Is that a beginning? I guess. I mean, but why you would call it that, I don't know, because physics breaks down, and because physics breaks down and logic is based on physics, I can't do any logic on that anymore, because I don't know what is it like to be so that hot and that small. I don't have any idea how logic would function in that universe. It's just because if math can't even do it, what the hell is logic going to do? Logic even has some logic gates built into it. So if mathematics is breaking down, forget it. You can't have cause and effect as an idea, or any logical idea, because you don't even know if logic applies anymore. Yeah, Cross used the term nothing as a kind of a clickbait for his book. maybe he did. I don't know. Yeah, if nothing exists, like the true nothing, in philosophy, if there's nothing there, you have no rules. There is no logic. There are no rules, because if you add those, then you have something. So there would not be a rule that nothing could happen, because there is no rules. So if you had a true nothing, everything could come into being just for no reason, because there wouldn't be any reason either. So such a state is not something that is. I don't think it ever was or could be. But if we ever had a nothing, I think it would stop being a nothing very quickly. But who knows? Don't divide by 0. Right, exactly. Well, what happens is, let's try if I see what happens if I divide by 0. I've never tried that before. 0, hey, computer, divide by 0. Okay, let's see what happens. All right. What does that mean?